Welcome to all of our ISM members and ISM partners, guests. I would like to welcome you to our Supply Chain Information Flow program. At this point, I'm going to turn the program over to our host, David Johnson, and he'll introduce our special guest today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Johnson, and on behalf of the ISM New Jersey Board of Directors, myself, and the wonderful Sam Gupta, I'd like to introduce you to Supply Chain Information Flow, how to talk to IT. This is a timely and interesting topic because, as we all know, every company is a data company. You're either looking for ways to monetize your data or looking for ways to take action of that data. And unfortunately, the people who are, or fortunately for some of us, the people who control that data and who control that information sit in the IT world. When I was thinking about this topic, I knew that I needed to find someone who straddles the line between IT and procurement, somebody who does a lot of IT negotiation, somebody who's comfortable living in both of those worlds, someone who could distill and help us procurement people get the information that we need to be effective negotiators with technology suppliers. And the person that came to mind was Mr. Sam Gupta. Sam is an ERP specific negotiator and I won't say consultant because that's belittling him. He's so much more than that. But today he's an educator. Today, Sam is going to help me teach you guys how to get the most out of your conversations with IT and maybe how to translate so that you're speaking the same language, right? We as procurement people know we need to know enough about something to negotiate a deal for it. And Sam's going to help us out today. Sam, why don't you give a brief introduction on who you are and how much you know about this. Let's get your bona fides out of the way.
Amazing. First off, thank you so much for having me, David. And obviously, thanks for the wonderful work that you and Kathy are doing in this forum to educate the procurement folks. So the people who don't know me, I mean, I am hanging out a lot in the ISM forum, so I'm going to assume that some people at least know me. But the people who don't know me, I am Sam Gupta. I'm principal at ElevatIQ. I have been doing the ERP implementations, ERP selections, negotiations for last 20-ish years. As part of ElevatIQ, we offer similar services, which is going to be around anything and everything related to selection implementation and the negotiation of anything that is going to be part of your digital transformation architecture. Is that good, David, for the intro? Do you want me to go on? I can go on for half an hour if you like.
Oh, no. Let's talk about, like, you straddle you have such an interesting role because you're such a technical wizard, and you're also like we can talk procurement, like, just, you know, in our own, and this is me personally, you know, talking into you in a way that's like I'm talking to another procurement guy, right? So how do you distill that? Because in your role, you go from you're translating, you're talking to the tech guys, and you're also talking to procurement leaders. But how do you approach that? So as the middleman.
That's a great question. In my case, I have a little advantage because, you know, I have been doing this for roughly 20 years. So, you know, typically in my role, I am not going to be just the IT or procurement. I need to have sales skills. Even if I'm not selling anything, sales skills meaning I should be able to communicate the message that people are looking for. When I am talking to procurement, I need to talk procurement so that they can understand what I am trying to communicate. And that's the message that I am going to have for the procurement folks is understand how IT thinks. You need to understand their underlying motivations. Okay, what excites them, what motivates them, and if you create your pitch around their interest, the communication is going to be easier. Now, the same thing goes for the IT folks as well when they are talking to the procurement. So it's really tailoring the message to what they really understand. These are the sales fundamentals that I personally utilize. That's how I bridge the gap. And David, if you want me to go into the details of how the IT organizations work, what are different roles and responsibilities in that, and how you should be talking to them, I'm more than happy to get into that. If you like.
I think a really quick overview of that would be good. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. So let's talk about, first of all, how the procurement organizations are structured, and then we'll compare that with IT, especially when we talk about the IT organizations of the product-centric companies, which is going to be manufacturing, retail, and distribution, because that's where you are going to have a lot more role of the procurement. There are other organizations, obviously, they are slightly more tech heavy. They understand the IT structure a little bit more, so for them, it's different. So let's talk about the procurement organization. When we think of the procurement organization, I'm going to ask you, David, okay, how many people do you have in your procurement organization? You are going to tell me, you know what? I have one person for each of the categories. I have people who are going to be procuring. I also have people, they are going to be responsible for strategic sourcing. Now, I, as the
If
CFO,
you're lucky.
Exactly, right? So I, as the CFO, am going to ask you, okay, so why do you need so many people? And you are going to tell me that when somebody is buying a specific category, that's a very different skill set than, somebody is buying the category B. Now, I am going to ask you, David, okay, how about IT? How many people do you have in IT? And you are going to tell me that, you know what? I have this one superstar who does everything for us, okay? He fixes everything, okay? Whenever I had trouble, he was always there for me. I could count on this IT person, and he has always been there for me. But let's compare this with other, IT organization in some of the industries where they are going to be slightly more tech heavy. For example, let's say if you talk about the real tech, meaning they are in the tech development business, banks, healthcare. You talk about insurance companies. You talk about education. They are a little deeper overall in their tech capabilities. So the guy you are talking about who fixes everything, they are typically going to be responsible for the infrastructure. That's a very, very, very different skill set than somebody who is going to be at the strategy level, right? Because they go through very different education curriculum. Then you are going to have people like, business analysts, the product managers, and they all have very specific skill set. Now, when you talk about just the ERP organization, in that as well, you are going to have a guy who's going to be responsible for finance, then supply chain. So the same, translation needs to be there in the IT guy. But typically, when I look at the SMB organizations, even larger organizations, they have very, very, very few IT skill sets. And typically one person is responsible for the supply chain, the procurement IT, it's going to be logistics IT, it's going to be your IT, it's going to be licensing, it's going to be legal, contract, development, maintaining the infrastructure, fixing the, you name it, okay? It's almost like, one guy is doing a lot. So I think that's where the companies need to understand that, this guy is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and you cannot ask for so many different things, and you need to sort of walk closer to them in terms of translating the information. So it's going to be slightly easier. I don't know if it gives a little, insight into how the organizations are structured in the other companies that are going to be slightly more tech heavy versus in the traditional organization.
So I've been really lucky. I am a tech procurement guy. I've been a tech procurement guy for 27 years, for a very long time. Some people on here know me. Deb knows me. I worked with her for a long time, Deb Augustus. I am far more a tech guy than I am a procurement guy. I just happen to be good at procurement and contracts and legal, like you were saying. When I was starting out, one of the first things that I learned, and somebody told me this when I was a kid, that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Yep. So, I am often like you said, you're dealing with different types of people within IT, right? There's the supply chain guy, like even in ERP, right? But there's a Salesforce guy, and there's a SAP guy or something like that. I always start those conversations by saying, I know nothing. Aside from saying that, do you recommend, like, us as procurement people approach IT guys as the subject matter experts and just say, teach me everything? Or should we specifically say, hey, I'm trying to run this contract, how would you do?
So that's very interesting. I'll tell you both sides. So sometimes when we look at people who are trying to communicate a lot more IT, what they are going to do is they are going to be too close to a solution than describing a problem. So I'll give you an example, okay? So, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with the user stories. I will take an example of the user story. I can describe, what user stories are, but typically user stories are going to be some of the requirements, stories that you are trying to communicate that you need to either implement a tool or you need to develop something, right? So that's how the software folks get the requirements, right? So when you look at the user story of a person who is trying to do a lot more IT, then they might have background in. So they are going to say, hey, you know what? This is a real story, by the way, David. Okay, so this is the director of marketing, and director of marketing is saying, you know what? I am looking for, in my ERP system right now, I have when I am trying to search for anything, then what I need to do is I need to press F4 every time. When I go to any website, then what I am able to do is I should be searching based on my search criteria on the website. And, as soon as I put the search criteria, boom, the search comes back. And I have my information that I'm looking for. Here in this specific ERP system, I have to press F4. It just seems very unnatural. So what I want you to do is, as the IT guy, is take off this F4 and give me the enterprise section. Now, the director of marketing has no idea how much effort is going to be involved in enabling that feature, because now we are trying to change the entire product architecture, the search capabilities, the whole foundation of the software. Now, let's say if you have the IT guy who is not challenging the marketing or the business, and the requirement negotiation is going to be part of the whole IT procurement handshake that needs to happen. So if they don't change and they are going to take the requirements on its face, then what is going to happen is it's going to be $1 million disaster. Okay, and the reason why it is going to be $1 million disaster, number one, it is never going to work. Okay, because you are going to over-engineer the heck out of the system, because it was never designed to do that. So the problem in this specific story was that, they should be treating the BlackBerry as BlackBerry and not try to make it look like an iPhone. Okay, when you try to do that, it doesn't go well. It doesn't work that way. So that's the comparison, that when, let's say, the business people are trying to do too much IT. Now, let's go back to the other story where, let's say, if the business is saying, you know what, I am looking for an experience like United Airlines or the American Airlines, where I go as the customer and I have my record, the customer service rep knows everything about me. Now, they are not being specific in their requirements in terms of what they want. So this is the story that they may have given to the IT guys, but now this could be $1 billion project in enabling that. So one of the things that I like to recommend to any business executive is going to be, okay, remember SMART, S-M-A-R-T. It stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. When you are trying to create a story, okay, any requirement story needs to go through this criteria. And if it does not fit this criteria, that means either you are trying to over-engineer the solution, which you obviously don't have as much background as the other IT guys. So when you are trying to communicate the requirement, the story, make sure you remember SMART. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but
oh, that's a great response, but it does bring up another question. So there is a very different way that IT people tend to think. And there's a question in from Jorge in the chat about ITIL to understand ITSM. But before I get to that, I want you to talk about process versus impact, right? You just said, the marketing director said, I want this, right? But the IT guy is now thinking about the road that it takes to get to that. Do you find that that's a big determining factor in translating IT speak into regular non-IT speak, right? The difference between process and arrival.
The process and the arrival, and I am going to go back to my user story example. The reason why that is important is because user story has 3 different components, and that touches on the process, as well as it's going to touch on the impact part as well. But in most cases, when you look at the user story, it's going to have 3 components. Number 1, it is going to be the stakeholder, which is the audience, the consumer of the benefits that they are going to receive from the requirement or the story. The second is going to be the meat of the story, the task that you are trying to assign to your IT in terms of what you want them to accomplish. But that does not say anything about the impact, which is where the third part is going to be really important. It's called so that. Okay. And typically when I look at any of these stories that I get from any business units, including procurement, they are really, really good at that middle section, but they miss, okay, who is the consumer of the benefit and what is going to be so that. Okay. So if you actually emphasize on the so that part, that's where your impact is going to be really handy, so that IT people can understand what you are trying to accomplish as part of that. But there has to be, you guys are procurement people, you know how negotiation works. There has to be negotiation in terms of the requirements, right? So, and you have to really ask IT, okay, do you feel comfortable with it? Do you have enough details? Do you see any financial risks? And that is the question that you should be asking your IT. And I can guarantee this, if you provide them enough insights in terms of what is going to be, what is the overarching vision, okay, that is typically missing when you are going to be working with IT. Typically, you are going to say, you know what, I am looking for United Life experience, or I am looking for my to remove this feature because I just don't like it. And that becomes very difficult for them to visualize, okay, why do you want this again? Tell me more.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so real quick, yes or no answer to get back to Jorge's question. Do you think it's valuable for a procurement person to get ITIL certified to understand the process a bit more for when we talk to IT?
Yeah, and I am probably not going to give you a very straight answer there, because sorry, you're not going to get that from me. But yeah, I don't think certifications are great. They are a tool, but they are not supposed to make you smart. Okay, so if you are going for the certifications just to learn how the certifications work, but again, they are not going to help you with the fundamentals of how people think, why they behave, why your software implementations fail. I don't think any certifications can tell you that.
This is true. This is true. So from my personal experience as a supplier manager and as a strictly tech, procurement person, I often find myself interacting with outsourced arrangements, right? AMS providers or help desk, and having that ITIL certification and being able to speak that language has helped me to maximize the relationships, right? I have an AMS provider that is, they're like, we're going to do this. And I'm working for an organization that is not, everyone's not ITIL certified. And I have to be the one who translates from ITIL speak to what we're actually doing at the organization. So Jorge, to answer your question, I have found a ton of value in being ITIL certified. And it's good for your resume too. You can put it on your resume, especially if you're looking for an IT procurement role. But that goes back to another thing, right? One of the things that procurement can be is a trusted partner to IT. You talked about, Sam, earlier, you talked about strategic sourcing and category management, and that's higher level discussions, right? That's not day-to-day tactical, I need you to do a PO.
Yep.
We in procurement want to be at the table earlier because that gives us a better chance to get a better result.
I agree.
How do you have a plan, right? As a guy who comes in cold, how do you get to that trusted advisor status? Just an example, like how would you do it?
So
If you were, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Just to clarify the question, do you want me to be positioned as the trusted advisor, or are you looking for the procurement folks to be the trusted advisor on the table?
Well, this is me asking you to put on your procurement person hat right now.
Okay, all right. So I am the procurement person. Okay, so typically I'll tell you from my perspective in terms of what I do to become the trusted advisor, and you can probably implement the similar strategies, as the procurement person, and I'll try to translate that as well. So in my case, I am coming to an organization completely cold. So obviously my job is going to be slightly harder because I just don't know anything about the organization. So I need to do a lot more pre-research. And typically in that pre-research, what I personally like to do is I like to look at the person's career journey. What are their interests? What are they going to like to hear? And what is this organization trying to do? And how I can tailor the messaging for each of those people. Now let's go back to your procurement example. So let's say if the procurement person is trying to grab the table earlier, they need to understand who all are going to be sitting on the table and what are their core interests. What is this company trying to do in the overarching picture? Whatever this project may be, okay, do I have the clarity on the vision for that, and how is everybody going to be adding the value? Even though you are not going to do somebody else's job because that's going to fire back, you need to have deep understanding of what is going to be impact for them. What do these guys care for? In most cases, most people care for their resume. And yes, I agree with you that certifications are great for your resume. Okay, they provide you the educational tools that you need to be successful, whether you are talking about communicating with anybody or trying to execute any of the projects. So again, what you need to do is you need to understand the underlying motivations of what people really care for on the table and align the messaging with their interest and take subtle approach in terms of what you are trying to get out of it. And in negotiation, and again, the procurement people are far superior, I would say, in terms of negotiation than I should be talking about negotiation. But negotiation is always given, you have to give something to be able to get something, right? So unless you give, okay, you are not going to get something back. So unless you understand what these people really care for, so you have to give something that you don't care for so that you can get something that you care for. I don't know if I answered your question.
That's a good, I mean, you have it coming from a different mindset, right? As an internal customer, no, actually, honestly, it's about the same, right? As an internal person, we still have to understand the motivations of
exactly
our leaders, right? And in order to be a trusted advisor, you have to be able to talk to their motivations, right? Exactly. And understanding long-term strategy, understanding and helping to build that long-term strategy is where you want to be. So I want to get to a couple of things in the chat, right? A BRD document with pre-established questions to guide procurement or business for building out specifications or requirements. Do you think a pre-fabricated form is worthwhile for an organization?
And again, I think I am going to have similar answer. So when people look at the template, okay, they emphasize a lot more on the template than the actual outcome of what you are trying to accomplish as a business. So when I look at, people who follow the template, and by the way, don't get me wrong, templates are great. Okay, everybody should have them because that's how you sort of speak the same language. But at the same time, you are not just focusing on the template itself or the management aspect of the problem. You still have to worry about how the solution is going to work. And that's where I sense a lot of gaps. So people focus a lot more on the template. So when you look at BRD, now the BRD that is going to be good for you, David, may not be as good for me because I have a very different business. Okay, so again, understand the business and the function and the processes and the impact deeply, and then create a tailored document that is going to be a communication tool. Now, if any of the pre-existing formats work, that's great because you don't have to put an effort in creating that. But yeah, I mean, don't worry too much about the format because that's very procedural mindset. Be a little strategic overall in terms of the solution. Try to understand the deeper, meaning try to read between the lines, I guess, that's that's what I would do.
That's true. That's true. Jorge, just really quickly, their ITIL and the CPSM certification are very different. CPSM is great for any supply chain role. You can go into logistics. It teaches you, when you're going through the training for that, it teaches you logistics, it teaches you procurement theory, it teaches you strategy, it teaches you a whole lot that you're not going to necessarily learn in ITIL. ITIL is very specific to IT service management, IT asset management. CPSM is going to get you a lot more. And I'm not just saying that because this is an ISM New Jersey website and webinar. I'm saying it because if your career strategy is to move into supply chain, to move into any other strategic sourcing type role, the CPSM certification is going to be very, very valuable to you. And I'll tell you a personal story, okay? I've been doing my job for 20 plus years. I cannot be a CPO now because all I've ever done is tech. I've never done travel. I've never done, direct supply chain. I've always done tech. Having a CPSM certification will help me, but having that experience in other areas will help me as well. So I hope that addressed your question. I find the CPSM very valuable. I do have an MBA, so that helps in some ways. All right, back to you, Mr. Gupta. Since we in procurement sit in this weird triangle, right, where we have to be the translator from, legal to finance to IT, and I think it was Tanya or who asked the question, how do we set expectations and communications between our internal staff, right? So in your example, the marketing director said, I want this universal search. And the IT, that marketing director sold somebody in procurement and somebody in IT. And then that IT guy said, yeah, I can do that, but it's going to take me 2 years and it's going to cost you $1 million. That expectation was provided to procurement, right? How do we, one, translate that back to the business, right? Our IT, finance, legal folks, in a way that is setting expectations realistically and kind of softly so that it's not, no, you can't do this.
So in that story, I guess, I am going to provide you some more insight in terms of how the real world works, okay? So you mentioned that, I need to set very clear expectations with respect to IT. This is probably going to take 2 years to build this, but this is what IT is going to say, okay? Because IT is very invisible, okay? It's very uncertain. If they are doing something that they have already done 5 times in their life or 5,000 times, they will be able to estimate. But every problem in IT is probably going to be new. And this is what IT typically does, okay? Because obviously they are afraid of losing their jobs. They don't want to be coming across as somebody who's going to say, this takes 2 years, okay? That's not how IT works and things, because obviously it could have the jeopardizing impact for their career as well. So this is what they are going to say, okay, in that story. Okay, let me try this out, okay? I'm gonna try it and maybe I can fix it in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, okay? So your business is gonna say, okay, let's do this. So after 4 weeks, you are going to meet again, and then they are going to have a little finding, and then they are going to say, I don't think I could accomplish this in 4 weeks. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to take 8 more weeks. Okay, then you have 8 more weeks and 12 more weeks. And now we are at a 2-year point and still the project is not going anywhere. And the reason why it is not going anywhere is because the requirements must have been challenged to begin with. And sometimes as the internal folks, it's very, 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 very hard for them to do that. And that's where, some of the external consultant or the independent consultant might be able to help challenge the thinking in terms of what the business is thinking and what you are going to get. So yes, the expectation management is key, but expectation management, when you talk about very complex IT problems, sometimes it could be hard. The only way to do that is going to be when they really trust you. And the only way to build the trust with your IT person is going to be when they feel comfortable with your organization, when they feel comfortable working with you, and they feel that their voice is being heard. In most cases, I don't think a lot of IT people feel that they are being heard, and then they are simply going to start taking orders and they are going to do whatever they can in their power. And that's probably the reason a lot of different, projects fail. But that expectation management piece that you mentioned, that's extremely critical, but obviously it is going to be the business that is going to be the driving factor. Okay, are you going to make sure that this guy is comfortable in communicating that it actually takes 2 years? Okay, are you willing to hear that?
Yeah, we have to be willing to hear that, right? Because
Yep.
we have to be the bearer of bad news sometimes.
Yep.
So let me see if I can distill down the things that you've said to us today. When we have to go and talk to IT, we have to prepare properly for the people that we're going to meet with, right? You said, understand them on LinkedIn, get them on LinkedIn, understand their motivations. We have to make sure that we don't arrive with assumptions, right? We have to make sure that we get an understanding of any of the technical terms, any of the technical jargon or acronyms that they might bring across. Come with a list of questions, because we want the tech guy to be able to speak so he's comfortable.
Exactly.
We have to understand that there's a difference between the way that we think and the way that they think. We care about impact, they care about process, right? So we have to be aware of that fact and remain adaptable and try to understand and get them to help us translate that process to impact. Did I miss anything?
I think you covered. If you want, I can provide some more intel there in terms of what all you can do to manage risk, because as the procurement person, you are trying to manage the risk from the financial perspective. So one of the things that we like to do, if you have any similar projects that you have done in the past and how they performed, and you can probably draw some intel from there to figure out how long this is actually going to take and whether you can trust your IT guy if they are really qualified to execute this project for you, or should you be looking for somebody else? Because obviously that is going to be part of your decision making as well. So go back to where you have the expertise in. If you have executed similar projects, then that'll give you a little intel that, okay, IT guy is saying 2 weeks, but this has taken 2 years. Okay, how does that work? That's not possible because this is probably a similar project. This has taken me 2 years. There's no way you can do this. So you need to tell me a little bit more. Are you afraid? So that's where you can get them to speak. No, if this has taken 2 years, then probably we should be thinking about 2 years for this one as well. And that's how you sort of balance the expectation management in my mind. And I don't know if that answers.
Oh, that's a good one. Tanya Wells has asked for an example of a failure and what we've learned from it.
So example of a failure, from my perspective, is she willing to hear?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so tell you, my life is full of failures, to be honest. Okay, and when I am walking in any of the implementation, they are either over budget or they are not going in the direction that the company should be going, to be honest. Okay, and most of the companies are going to say that, you know what, they have 100% success rate. That's not how the IT projects are supposed to work. So I'll give you an example of a customer that we were working with. In this particular case, they had fancy ERP system. They had, their IT team that did the whole implementation, and they had problem that this implementation wasn't working well for them. They had already invested roughly $5 million on a very small ERP. It's not even large ERP like SAP or Oracle. It's a very small to mid-size ERP, and they had already invested, and they had no idea where this implementation was going. And I went there and I'm like, okay, give me some documentation of the whatever you have done. Typically, when you are building a house, you are going to draw the blueprint. You are going to have some sort of architectural expectations. You are going to have something in writing on paper before you construct the house. In this particular case, there was no documentation for the business requirement. And I am going for the example about the BRD. I was asking, okay, give me at least BRD. Okay, I don't care what format it is. Give me some information. They had no, BRD. Okay, give me some inventory procedures, warehouse procedures. What do you do on a daily basis? Have you ever documented anything? Nothing, zero. Okay, where is the information sitting right now? It's sitting inside ERP. Okay, then I am, okay, so why is this a failure? Why is it not working? Because I get defects on a daily basis. I'm not getting my business results, and that's why it is a failure. And I want you as a developer to code in a way so that this can be fixed. Now, here is my answer. Okay, first of all, you should not be coding on top of that because it's already way over engineered. So even though the business may feel that it's not a failure, sometimes, businesses are okay. They are going to claim that, it's not a failure. It's working for me. It's okay. But it's a failure in my eyes because you are sitting in one of the most strategic IP that you have no knowledge on. And the only person who can help you with that is going to be the vendor who has coded. And by the way, not just the vendor, the people who have coded. As soon as they leave that organization, nobody is going to know what is inside that, even if you are talking about the exact same skill set, because they need to know how the business process works. So that's where the key is. So what is that? So I don't know if that is the example of a project failure, but in my eyes, that's a project failure because you have one of the most bloated IP of your organization sitting in a black box that you have zero control on.
No, that's a good one. That's a good one. Sheesh. What could procurement professionals convey to IT personnel that would help them understand the core objectives approach to completing a project from procurement's perspective?
Completing a project in terms of, let me make sure I understand the question. So basically you are asking that what can I do to complete the project timely? Is that what?
To help IT understand the core objectives or approach from procurement side, right? So now we're talking from procurement to IT. What are our objectives? What is our approach, right? So now we're translating from procurement to IT. So this way we can coalesce into a single kind of thought.
Exactly, and that's where the writing of the user stories are going to be really critical, and they are going to be having a very large apex is what you want to have. So let's say if apex is the goal and the objective of a project, you need to have some sort of acceptance criteria. How are you going to accept this project? What are you expecting out of it? The more specific you are in defining those acceptance criteria, the more your IT folks will be able to help. If the acceptance criteria is not gonna sort of measure up to that SMART criteria that I had mentioned, then you are going to have the generic expectation. You are probably going to get generic solution, right? So again, if you want to deliver the project timely, number one, define the scope of the project really, really well. And then you have to continuously measure, because obviously with any IT project, there is going to be significant uncertainty of, with any of the projects. So you need to make sure that whatever objectives you had set in the beginning, every 2 weeks, are you measuring that? What is going to be the impact for the budget, for time, for the scope on the project? And if you need to redefine your objectives based on the technical constraints that you might be hitting. So the more controlled process you have, the more involved you are with the project, the more quickly you can pivot. That the lower the budget is going to be, in my experience, for the project, and that is probably the best way of managing any IT projects.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a great way to do it. Yeah, so I'm sorry if I butcher your name, Ireda. I answered your question in the chat. So I think one of the things that we can talk about is there tends to be a difference of personality between IT folks and procurement folks. Bridging that gap, I guess we kind of addressed that, right? Because we said IT folks like to talk. So I think, just to reiterate, we have to ask the right questions and give our IT folks the opportunity to educate us on the things that we don't necessarily know. Sam told me before we started this meeting, he said, if you give me room, I will talk for a half hour. I think it's a perfect example of what it's like working with IT. We have to give them the leeway to educate us on a product that they're intimately involved in. We have to negotiate a contract. We have to negotiate with a supplier. We have to get a deal. We have to understand the licensing. We have to understand the infrastructure and the system integrations. But they have to live in it, day in, day out. They have to map it. They have to understand the long-term strategic roadmaps. They have to do all of that stuff. So as we seek to build out this deal, right? When I go to SAP and I say, I need to renew my ERP platform, I need to sit with my procurement guy for an hour beforehand, and I need you to tell me how this works. Because even if we did it 3 years ago, it's probably changed since then. That's my last little bit. Sam, you can take it away. We've got 3 minutes left. I'll give you 3 minutes uninterrupted to talk about you, your business. Oh, we definitely want to talk about your ERP networking, happy hours and that stuff, because if you're a supply chain guy, if you are interested in the technology behind your ERP system, Sam is the expert and he can put you in contact with lots and lots of people. So Sam, sorry, I took up another minute. Take it away.
No problem at all. So, from our perspective, when we engage with any of the projects, as I mentioned in the beginning, you probably require 8 or 10 different skill sets from the IT perspective when you are doing any sort of ERP or digital transformation projects. Now, it's very hard to get that skill set on a full-time basis. So you need to borrow a little bit, right? And that's where companies like us can help. We help with the ERP selection, contract negotiation, and typically you are going to require 3 different expertise: legal, your IT itself, and the business, which is the most important. And that is something that we bring to the table. So again, if you need any help, you can find me on social media. Sam Gupta, ElevatIQ is the easiest way to find on Google. You'll get my LinkedIn, Twitter link. And if you want to come to our happy hour, hit me up. We have a lot of supply chain folks that are involved with our happy hour as part of our WBSRocks podcast. So we'd love to have you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you, Kathy, for setting this up. Join us again on June 1st, where we will have Mark Raffin, the negotiations ninja, who will be his second in a series on negotiation. In July is going to be a pretty cool one. We have the classification guru, where we'll be talking about cleaning dirty data, spend data, contract data, and then hopefully I can convince Sam to come back and give an overview on ERP in maybe August or September. We all live in an SAP and an Oracle world, and it would be good if Sam can bring his expertise and teach us a little bit about how an ERP works, and not the least bit because I have an ERP renewal coming up in a couple of months. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I hope it was informative, and hopefully I'll see you in June.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Sam.